The theme of Sunset Boulevard is simply how corrupt Hollywood can be, how mean and heartless the town may be, how people will do anything to get ahead there, even if it means sleeping with a has-been who's creepy and demented. It's a story of Hollywood. The original opening of Sunset Boulevard was actually quite different than the one we see in the film. What it was the LA County morgue with a bunch of dead bodies under sheets with little toe tags on them. And Holden is wheeled in, and he's placed there, and conversations begin to occur between the corpses.
Apparently, what they did was they took the film out to show it to some audiences and to get a reaction, and there was this laughter.
Wilder described it to me. He described exactly what happened with the audience, that the detail that got the audience roaring with laughter and just killing, the mood, the intended mood, was two characters in the morgue are talking to each other.
It really went down from there. They didn't get that it was supposed to be kind of funny. They thought it was hysterically funny.
It doesn't come off that way when you read it, but apparently in visualizing it, it does. So they said, oh my God. And they completely changed the opening.
At the beginning of the film, we see police cars driving into a driveway, and then suddenly, as if out of nowhere, we see a corpse floating in the swimming pool. But we see it from a really peculiar angle. We see it from down in the pool looking up at the dead body with a little bit of blood trickling out of its chest. It was difficult to shoot, and it's one of the few instances where Wilder does call attention to the shot as an image. It was difficult to film. They didn't know how to film with an underwater setup because I don't think they really had the equipment. So they had to shoot it from above, but how? So what he told the camera operator was, I want it from a fish's viewpoint. So the guy went and built a tank and experimented with dolls and mirrors and shooting. And it turned out if the water was something like 40 degrees and no higher, because that would cause distortion, they could film it from above, the camera at the edge of the pool, looking down at a mirror, and in the mirror was reflected the image of William Holden. What's great about it, too, is that it's distorted enough that it doesn't give the entire film away.
That opening would be enough to stamp Sunset Boulevard as one of the great movies. I mean, it's one of the most striking, stirring openings I've ever seen in a movie.
The mansion was actually not in the 10,000 block of Sunset Boulevard, as Joe Gillis says in the beginning of the film. It was out on Wilshire and has subsequently been destroyed, but it was a fabulous old, if somewhat decrepit and unused house that was owned by the ex-wife of J. Paul Getty.
The inside of the house was totally created on a set, and it was an amazing set. And I'll tell you, one day I saw the cameraman take some, it looked like pumice, like marble dust, and he rubbed his hands and he went whoosh, in front of the camera to give it a kind of feeling that the corners were a little dusty. That was the kind of detail that was thought through by the creators of the film. I was amazed at that.
Wilder's camera style is very interesting. He's often been said to favor the screenplay over the image, and he certainly cared about his screenplays. His actors were never allowed to change a single word.
We never deviated from that script. There were no new lines for the next day. That was as tight a script as I have ever worked on. And what was fascinating to me, and I've never seen any script like it, was that in the left-hand column, there would be all the camera direction. In other words, Billy, in his writing, was directing.
I've been at Paramount 72 years. I started in 1928. And of all of the people on the lot, writers, directors, producers, executives, I don't think anyone has made such an impression on me as Billy Wilder. He and Charlie Brackett were writers on the lot.
Billy Wilder was a huge name in Hollywood in 1950. He'd already won an Oscar for The Lost Weekend. He'd made Double Indemnity. He'd made The Major and the Minor. A series of successful films. This was a very bitter film for Hollywood to look at because, of course, it was about Hollywood.
I think that what Billy was most concerned about was the fact that that he might be perceived as betraying his colleagues and his own industry.
Some people loved it, some people hated it. The trade papers were mixed. Variety, I think, called it disturbing. Well, yes, it is disturbing. The Hollywood Reporter gave it a rave review. I said, this is the kind of movie that really should be studied frame by frame. But the most famous story is the encounter between Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, and Billy Wilder, the director of the film, after an early screening.
Louis B. Mayer became absolutely incensed at one of these screenings and went up to Billy and said, you know, how could you do this?
Everyone in the screening, except for Louis B. Mayer, loved it. Mayer stomped out, headed to his car, and said to Billy Wilder on the way out, basically, you bastard.
And Billy had a famous retort.
I mean, it really was heated language because he was appalled at the image of Hollywood that Wilder was about to present to the American public. Billy Wilder always had a bitter and sardonic streak. When he was a screenwriter in Germany in the 20s and 30s, his films always had a bite to them, and he kept that bite when he came to Hollywood.
Then somebody pointed out to me that Wilder is probably the only Hollywood director at that time whose parents were consumed by the Holocaust. And so that's why there's always the dark element, even in comedies like Sabrina.
Norma Desmond is one of the great characters ever created. I mean, she stands up in any kind of literature, movies. She's just one of the great characters.
Gloria Swanson was not the first actress that they approached.
He thought about Mae West, and he went to see Mae West, and of course she wanted to rewrite the dialogue she had done in all of her pictures. So that didn't do well.
They thought about Pola Negri. Too much Polish accent is the way Billy described it later.
Then he went to see Mary Pickford, who had been America's sweetheart and who was our first big star here at Paramount. And Mary always owned her own negative, so that knocked that out.
So they were really stumped until Wilder was having tea in George Cukor's garden one day, and Cukor said, well, what about Gloria Swanson? Perfect. Here is the character, exactly as written.
I'm sure all of the other people he thought about would have been good, but Gloria, this picture was made for Gloria Swanson.
She really had fallen out of the public eye by the time this film was made. So she was a has-been, and she was making her famous comeback. She claimed that she didn't really know what the role was when she accepted it. She thought at first that it was for a small part. Why would they want her to be the star of a picture in 1950? She hadn't really been on screen since the early 30s. So of course she immediately took them up on it, divorced her fifth husband or fourth husband or however many husbands she'd had at that point, and moved to Hollywood.
And she worked so hard. She was so dedicated. She was the only one, I think, of all of us that truly understood the importance of this film, what it could become.
Gloria Swanson wasn't the crazy diva she appears to be in the film. She's a hardworking actress, and she knew what she was doing. Nevertheless, it's a version of herself that she plays.
Gloria Swanson gave, I think, a fantastic performance.
The part that William Holden plays in the picture, the gigolo part, was written for Monty Cliff.
And he actually accepted the role. He was filming The Heiress with Olivia de Havilland at the time, and he was very young and very famous and stark magnetism kind of thing. He went off skiing in Switzerland and thought about it a little bit, and perhaps on the advice of his agent, when he got back, he turned him down. So they approached William Holden, whose problem was that he'd made his big name in a film that had been made 10 years earlier, Golden Boy.
People forget, Bill Holden was really in a very frayed part of his career. It was a long time since he had done Golden Boy, since he was the great white hope.
So he was kind of a has-been himself at that point. He'd kept working, but nobody really noticed him. And Wilder met with him and really saw the intelligence and the character and the talent underneath this facade of all-American guyness. And turned out to be perfect. And I think he's even better than Clift would have been.
He was a much better choice than Clift would have been because you felt he was the all-American boy being corrupted.
Remember the scene where he comes in at the party and he's in that Vicuna coat. And you just die. There's something about him that is so exquisite, really. For me, he's the linchpin of the film. He is the one who makes it really, really work, because he is so real.
Erich von Stroheim perfect casting.
Here's a great director of the 20s and early 30s, made fantastic pictures, but kind of blew it by making a film first called Greed, which was umpteen hours long and was truncated, and it was a big scandal and a big mess, and then by making a film called Queen Kelly, starring Gloria Swanson.
This was not some actor playing this part. This was a real person who had knowledge of all this.
Queen Kelly is the film that we see in her screening room when she shows Bill Holden her glorious past. And when she stands up in front of the image of herself on the screen and does that creepy gesture, it's even more creepy because that film was the one that ruined her career. Queen Kelly was financed by Joe Kennedy, the father of JFK and RFK, and he was also apparently Swanson's lover at the time. And she called him from the set of Queen Kelly and said, "Joe, come out here at once. A madman is directing this picture," by which she was referring, of course, to Erich von Stroheim.
To watch him on the set, he always arrived completely dressed in his costume, in his butler's uniform. He always wore his white gloves. And he sat in his chair, that we all had chairs with our names in the back, and he would look until he found his. I'd bounce around and sit on anybody's chair. Anyway, he would sit on his. He would inch his chair closer and closer to the camera because he was so fascinated with what Billy was up to.
After Queen Kelly, there was a great deal of bitterness between von Stroheim and Swanson, but by 1950 they appeared to have patched things up, and there was apparently no rancor on the set at all. You know, they respected each other enough and had worked with each other long enough that they saw what was best in each other instead of what was worst. Von Stroheim ending up a ruined film director acting as the star's butler actually was, in some sense, an accurate depiction of Erich von Stroheim at that time.
Nancy Olson, a contract actress again, was put in.
In the original screenplay, you can see that they hadn't figured out who was to play that character yet, and they called her simply a fresh face.
I went back to school in the fall, and I got a call saying that Mr. Wilder was doing a picture called Sunset Boulevard. And there was a role called Betty Schaefer, and they wanted me to play that part. As we used to say in Wisconsin, I think I knew that I had fallen into a tub of butter because Billy Wilder was already legendary at that time. I saw on the script that he had co-written it and that he was going to direct it. So I knew that I was very fortunate indeed.
She's totally winning in the film. Really pretty and well-meaning, and adds the only element of real sort of heart that Hollywood shows to itself and to the outside world in the picture.
They used to call me Wholesome Olsen in school. And that is the quality that he wanted for Betty Schaefer.
She was really quite good, and she's one of those people that didn't get enough credit.
And when she came through our gate to see Cecil B. DeMille in that very famous scene where she and Bill Holden are in the car and Erich von Stroheim is chauffeur them in, and she's coming in to be Cecil B. DeMille. It was really a return for Gloria to Paramount, and certainly to see Cecil B. DeMille. When Cecil B. DeMille comes out of stage 18 to greet Gloria Swanson being driven on the lot by Erich von Stroheim, he looks at her and calls her young fella. And that was a very daring, warm, affectionate phrase that he always used with Gloria Swanson. Every time I'd meet her at the gate and bring her in to see him or to see Mr. Zucker, he'd always look at her and look her up and down and say, "Hello, young fella."
The key scenes of the film, in my opinion, are the scene in which Norma Desmond returns to Paramount after her long absence and is treated like the royalty she believes she is, and the people who work there believe she is, but is essentially forgotten by everyone else. It's a beautiful sequence. It's poignant but funny at the same time. One's laughing at her but feeling for her. And that's quite a remarkable mix of emotions to expect an audience to get, and Billy Wilder does get it. I don't think there was any love lost between Wilder and DeMille, but DeMille did agree to take the role.
I heard more movies in the Lux Radio Theater with Cecil B. DeMille, you know, announcing with his mellifluous voice. And when I heard his voice in Sunset Boulevard, you know, it was like a childhood memory.
He had a wonderful voice, And he had an air about him. He walked in the commissary and was, oh, there's Cecil B. DeMille. You know, there was a thing, and cachet, that was just part of him. He loved doing Sunset Boulevard. He loved playing himself. And wasn't he wonderful? I thought he was just simply fabulous.
There were rumors that Cecil B. DeMille could be tough on a set. He could be.
I saw him all the time on the lot with his riding crop, not that he ever got on a horse, and his boots.
In the scene where he plays himself, and Gloria Swanson is coming back to the studio to have a meeting with him, and he was doing Samson and Delilah at the time on stage 18. It's interesting because in the scene, DeMille used all of his own staff.
I'll tell you a funny story. Cecil B. DeMille, I'm laughing when I'm saying this, considered me to play Delilah in Samson and Delilah. And thank God he made the right choice and he put Hedy Lamarr in that role. I could no more have played Delilah, my little virginal college girl here. For heaven's sake, it was ridiculous.
There's a scene in the film in which Norma Desmond's friends appear to play cards. And Joe Gillis, the Holden character, calls them the Waxworks because they too are has-beens. H.B. Warner, Buster Keaton, Anna Q. Nilsson, big stars of the silent era. And by 1950, they were essentially forgotten.
That is simply magical, isn't it? When you see these familiar faces from the past, and there they are intensely playing cards.
H.B. Warner, he had been in Cecil B. DeMille's King of Kings, and he played Christ, and everybody said that jinxed his whole career. What role can you play after you've played J.C.?
There was a contest sometime, I think, in the mid-'70s, and the contest asked the question, what was one of the most romantic scenes in a movie that you've ever seen? And that little balcony scene with Bill and myself won the contest. We shot it at night, and Billy invited Artis Holden, who was Brenda Marshall, but her name was Artis. And that was Mrs. Holden. I had never met Mrs. Holden, and I was now going to embrace her husband in a long, passionate love scene. And I was terrified. And Billy, he said, look, after the embrace, he said, do not come apart until I say cut. Now, he said, it's going to seem like a long time because what I want to do is I'm going to be doing a long dissolve. So this is really for the purpose of the camera and what I have in mind in my cutting. So he said, it's going to seem like a long time, but just please continue to embrace. And he pulls me into his arms, and we kiss, and we kiss, and we kiss, and we hold on. And it seems like an eternity. And all of a sudden, there's a female voice from down below that says, cut! Damn it! Cut! And it was Artis Holden.
The New Year's Eve party is pretty bizarre. It's very unpleasant, in my opinion. She's hired a band. She's gotten all these expensive champagne, caviar, and Joe Gillis expects that it's a party. Well, it is a party, but there are only 2 guests. And he's a little freaked out by this because it begins to dawn on him just what it is that he's doing.
I thought that was an inspired scene and very hard to pull off. Really hard to pull off.
The other key scene, of course, is the final scene of the film, which turns out to have been the last scene that they filmed. Norma Desmond walking down the stairs, performing in what she believes to be her cherished Salome epic, having killed her lover and employee, Joe Gillis, being filmed by newsreel cameras, which she believes to be Cecil B. DeMille cameras, and does that creepy kind of dance thing.
I was on the set when that happened. I thought, oh my God, what an interesting combination.
She had such a good time. I was on the set for that as well, when Norma Desmond comes down the stairs. And by the way, that was done in maybe 2 or 3 takes.
Everything clicked. It's one of those movies where I thought everything clicked.
America accepted the film to a certain degree. It was a reasonably big hit, but it didn't win the Oscar.
By the time the film came out, I was married. By the time the Academy Awards came around, I was pregnant. And I remember going to the awards pregnant. I did not expect Sunset Boulevard to win.
The fact that the film did not win the Oscar for Best Picture is in part a reflection of Hollywood's distaste for the subject matter, namely itself. But it was up against All About Eve, a terrific film, which did win.
It also remains a classic, All About Eve, but not in the category of Sunset Boulevard.
That year, I thought Sunset Boulevard was by far the best movie of the year. And a lot of my friends thought All About Eve was the best movie, and I used to argue with them and so forth and so on.
Sunset Boulevard did do very well in the subsequent years after its initial release, so much so that a Broadway musical, a grandiose Broadway musical starring Glenn Close, came onto the scene a couple of years ago. It was a huge hit.
I think the only reason why anybody attempted Sunset Boulevard the musical is that it is a musical. It's not trying to be the film, because you can't get any better than the film. I do think that, though, that they did work well together. One does not cancel out the other. I think they're, two different perspectives on a magnificent piece of material.
What this film is truly about is a very, very huge theme, which is universal, and that is opportunism and its consequences.
Everyone in the film is, to some degree, an opportunist. That's a polite way of putting it, in my opinion.
The very nature of this business is the exploitation of people and the consequences of that.
It's people who are willing to sell themselves out, not only for the highest price, but for any price.
The test of time has kept this film alive in people's interest and excitement and fascination.
Oh, the film is a masterpiece.
It looks more real today than it did back then. It looks less gothic, less melodramatic, less flamboyant.
One of the things that's so interesting about Billy Wilder, in my view, is that he really bridges old Hollywood and new Hollywood. He's got all the grace, the structure, the beautiful use of language, the carefully constructed screenplays and images, with the bitterness and cynicism of our present time. These films that he made still work in front of audiences, and that's quite something. People now respond not only to the grace and the beauty of the films as well-made, well-crafted Hollywood, old-time Hollywood films, they also respond to the nastiness. And in that way, he was way ahead of his time.
My father, Franz Waxman, was a genuine wunderkind. A little kid, 5 years old, crawls up on the piano and starts playing by himself. And it was just his passion for his entire life. When he graduated from high school, he said to my grandfather, "I want to go to music school." And he said, "Well, what kind of a job is that? You've got to have a real job. Go to a bank." And so they struck a bargain, and the bargain was if my father would work in a bank for a year, his father, my grandfather, would take him to a trip to Dresden, Germany to study music. And so my father hung in there, did his year in the bank as a teller, hated every minute, every day of it, and went off to Dresden to study music.
Although his music sensibilities were Middle European, he was very quick to pick up what I would describe as an American kind of energy.
From Dresden, he went to Berlin, had no money, started playing piano in the Tingle Tangle Club, which was owned by a writer, director, composer named Friedrich Hollander. There are many famous Marlene Dietrich songs, specifically Falling in Love Again in The Blue Angel. And it was, in fact, Hollander that gave my father his big break to become the orchestrator of The Blue Angel. And that was at the UFA Studios, which was the MGM of Germany and Berlin in the 1930s. And it was there that he met his lifelong friends and colleagues like Billy Wilder and Peter Lorre, Karl Freund, this famous cinematographer. They were, in fact, all working as young men in the Berlin studios until the advent of Hitler. And then they were out of there.
He was very interesting as a composer, because he was another one of the great Middle Europeans who came here. courtesy of Hitler.
They went to Paris, and as did all the other people whose names I've just mentioned. They worked in the French film industry while sort of getting their lives together to come to Hollywood.
They came to Hollywood as outsiders, as genius outsiders, who then were embraced by that community, actually ended up defining that community in a way because of their work.
My parents went to a New Year's Eve party, and at this party, my father is introduced to a director. And this man says to him, "I've been looking all over the world for you." My father goes right after the turn of the year over to Universal, and of course the director was James Whale, and the picture was Bride of Frankenstein. So at 29, he got his big break, wrote one of the first symphonic scores, and on the basis of that was made music director of Universal Pictures.
Each of the studios had studio orchestras. I don't remember the actual size of the orchestras, but they were a full complement, strings, woodwinds, brass. They were probably somewhere in the vicinity of 60 players. And each of the studios had such an orchestra.
In the case of Sunset Boulevard, it was one of his first pictures at Paramount. He was, after all, the new composer at the music department. Victor Young was the senior composer. He was assigned this film, brought to Paramount not by Billy Wilder, who was under contract, but by Hal Wallace, whom he had done films for at Warner Brothers.
I cannot imagine any composer fulfilling musically what Billy Wilder had in his mind, especially for this story, than Franz Waxman, since they were best friends, since they had to escape Berlin together.
The relationship goes back to a time when my mother was introduced to my father by Billy. So they were very close. In fact, by the time I came around, Billy actually named me because my parents couldn't agree on a name. So my parents didn't name me, Billy Wilder did.
When I arrived here, Franz Waxman was one of the giants. I arrived here in 1950, and film music was full of giants at that time, when you stop to think of it. I mean, it was Franz Waxman, Miklos Rozsa, Max Steiner, Alfred Duman, David Raxon, Hugo Friedhofer. It was an amazing town with amazing people.
Usually the composer reported to the music director. And generally the first screening of the film was with the head of the music department. But probably in the case of Sunset Boulevard, it was with Billy.
When I first came to Hollywood in the 50s, I met one director the first 10 years that I worked here. Didn't even meet the directors in those days.
My father then would see the film alone, and that was the most important time for him, because he'd really think about what's the texture of this film going to be like. Not what is Norma's theme going to be, what's Joe's theme, but what kind of a feel do I want to have to this score? What's the orchestration going to be? What's the mood? How am I going to approach this? He saw the film with Billy. He probably had lunch afterwards and talked about it, and he came back with some musical ideas after what's called spotting the film, which is where you sit with the cue sheets, which are a minute or second-by-second breakdown of the film.
And that is what spotting a film is all about. It's about sitting down with the filmmaker and deciding we should have music in this place, but not in this place.
And the composer decides what scenes will have and what scenes will not have music.
Early on, for instance, at Metro, you spotted the film not with a director, a filmmaker, but with a specialist whose job it was to assist the composer in spotting the film.
The cue sheets are delivered on almost a daily basis, because at the same time the director is cutting the film. So as the cue sheets arrive, the composer sits down and begins to write the score.
In the old days, the score did not make it into the film until the film was locked. So there were no changes in those days, because you were working with a film that was final.
Full score is everything from flutes down to basses. and my father would then approve the full score, and then that would be taken to the studio and copied, and parts would be made for the recording session. Part of the process of getting the cue sheets every day or every other day and rewriting before you actually record a score are changes that can happen. And it is no secret that Sunset Boulevard had an original opening that did not survive the first preview. And interestingly enough, the music that my father composed for the final, if you will, opening of the film, main title and first scene, were what he had originally written for the first scene, Conversing Corpses, which was discarded.
I think Billy Wilder experimented obviously in two different ways of starting that picture, but fundamentally, since Joe Gillis is dead at the beginning of the picture and is talking to us, we know that that's going, he's going to be dead for the rest of this picture. He's going to end up dead.
And I think it's really interesting that both the director, Wilder, and the composer, Waxman, were able to take the music and condense it so that it worked in both situations.
When the movie starts, we hear music of a chase. It's a chase. Physically, obviously, it's a chase of a car. Not sure why or whatever it is, but it's a chase. But obviously, from a symbolic point of view, these are people who are trying to escape death. In the case of Norma, it's death of a career, therefore a person's soul. She's living, but she's dead. And death is waiting at the doorstep for her. For Joe, it's the bill collector. It's how do you make a living out there with a car that you can't even pay for, and you're just trying to make your payments end, so death is waiting for him too. When we first see Norma, she has her theme, which is a tango. Joe's is bebop, because he's a young, hip, hot writer. He's a kid who's on the make and on the run. So these two themes, plus the theme of the chase, work all the way through the picture. The keys that they're written in, the way they're orchestrated, one fits into another, which means, from my point of view, that Franz Waxman, who was trained legitimately as a composer in Berlin, was actually thinking of these scores as being composed right through. In other words, when the music stops and there's just dialogue, and then the music picks up again, it can pick up again. In other words, it completely works as a through composed set of ideas.
Well, I've always found what he did with the studio stroll particularly imaginative. This is, of course, the scene when Holden and Olson are working on their collaborative screenplay at night in the Paramount lot, and they would take breaks. And they would walk on the deserted streets, the old sets, and their dialogue, of course, and this is where they first really fall in love. And for this scene, my father created a parody of Paramount on Parade. My father slowed it down to almost a waltz, and it becomes the love theme. I thought that was an amazing use of musical invention that not many people are aware of when they first see the film. The tango theme for Norma is bizarre, and it is bizarre, obviously, on purpose to accentuate her character. And then from that point on, it deteriorates musically and becomes more subdued as the film goes on and as she becomes wilder. In fact, in the scene where she is being manicured and she's pumping herself up and trying to lose weight, sort of a montage, my father adds a gypsy violin over the tango to accelerate the mad motif, where even while she's working this hard to make herself 20-something again, it's all in her head. I mean, the music tells you that.
He was a brilliant dramatist, which I think is very important in a film music composer. It was just not a question of writing a good line of music, but it was appropriate to the action and to the scene.
Billy wanted at the end, in the famous staircase scene, to use Richard Strauss because of Salome. And my father said, Billy, let me try something, and if you don't like it, Strauss it is. And he wrote the Norma as Salome cue, which is called in the film The Comeback. and Billy liked it and kept it. My father won his first Oscar for Sunset Boulevard and his second the next year for A Place in the Sun, 1951. And this is the only time in the history of the Academy that a composer has won in 2 consecutive years.
I knew these guys were good, these composers, but I also learned that they actually composed this music for whatever going on with the timings. This has to be 3 minutes and 15 seconds. This has to be here. We spot the picture so it only happens here. Whatever they had to do technically that they overcame the technical limitations and wrote through composed symphonic works.
He was a great figure here, not only as a composer of film music, but he was a force for musical life in Los Angeles. He had a concert series that he conducted at UCLA, Royce Hall, and conducted, I think it was the premiere of Prokofiev's Seventh Symphony. I mean, things of that sort.
My father was really the consummate professional. I mean, I think he brought everything to the table to every assignment, and I think every director and producer got their money's worth.